By 1942, as World War II entered its third year, the vast oceans were no longer a safe haven for any Allied-flagged ship. From the calm waters of the North Atlantic, Nazi Germany's gray submarines, dubbed the Grey Wolves by the British, began to prowl. They were not merely machines of war, but symbols of an invisible terror, an enemy lurking in the shadows, striking only when it was too late to escape. After France fell in the summer of 1940, Hitler held a strategic prize, a chain of ports along the coast from Brest, Lorient, and Saint-Nazaire to La Rochelle. These bases opened a direct gateway to the Atlantic, something the German Navy had never possessed in World War I. From here, Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the German U-boat fleet, began implementing a strategy he believed could strangle the heart of Britain, a submarine blockade, or as he called it, a total underwater offensive. Dönitz believed victory would not come from large-scale naval battles, but from silent exhaustion. If enough British convoys were destroyed quickly, the economy and the populace would collapse before German troops ever set foot on the island. To achieve this, he devised the Rudel tactic, better known as the Wolfpack tactic. The tactic was simple yet brutal. Rather than attacking individually, U-boats operated in groups of 8 to 20, spread across the ocean in long lines. When a submarine spotted a convoy, it would stealthily follow, reporting the position back to headquarters via the Enigma radio. Dönitz, directing from his headquarters in France, would command the entire wolf pack to converge under the cover of darkness and surround the prey. When the attack signal came, the sea would explode with dozens of torpedoes striking simultaneously. Within minutes, an entire convoy could be reduced to burning wreckage amid screams and the roar of engines sinking into the icy depths. By 1942, the wolf pack had reached the height of its power. The period became known even to the Royal Navy as the darkest time in the Atlantic. That year, U-boats sank more than 1,100 Allied merchant ships, nearly 7.8 million tons of cargo, including oil, steel, food, tanks, and ammunition. In WWII, contrast, only 87 German submarines were lost, a staggering ratio, leading German newspapers to hail Dönitz as the commander who strangled Britain with invisible hands. British sailors had a bitter saying, "While we sleep, the wolves feed." Ships departing from Halifax, New York, or Liverpool knew they might never reach the other shore. Every night, Mayday calls pierced Allied radio frequencies. On the surface, oil slicks and corpses mingled with burning wreckage. The winter ocean was mercilessly cold, and death could arrive as suddenly as a torpedo's explosion. Germany's advantage lay not only in tactics but also in technology and discipline. Type 7 and 9D U-boats, the backbone of the fleet, were small, agile, and could dive over 200 meters. Their passive sonar could detect engine noises from miles away, while the METOX radar warning device allowed them to sense Allied aircraft radar from a distance, giving them 2 to 3 minutes to dive, just enough time to vanish into the dark waters. In the submarine world, 2 minutes could mean the difference between life and death. Whenever a U-boat departed port, its crew was sent off with fluttering German flags and the sound of marching music. At home, they were celebrated as heroes, knights of the deep. German newspapers featured commanders like Günther Prien, U-47, Otto Kretschmer, U-99, and Erich Topp, U-552, calling them the aces of the deep. They received Knight's Crosses and were personally greeted by Hitler. Many were barely in their 20s, yet already credited with dozens of merchant ships sunk. For the Allies, however, the battle at sea was a struggle for survival. Every cargo ship, oil tanker, and supply vessel departing British ports was a lifeline sustaining the economy and war effort. Cut those lines, and there would be no D-Day, no aid to the Soviets, and possibly no ultimate victory. But in 1942, everything seemed stacked against them. The Royal Navy faced a shortage of escort ships, radar was rudimentary, and the British Air Force lacked the range to patrol the mid-Atlantic, a region sailors called the Black Gap, where no plane could reach them during a U-boat attack. Dönitz knew this weakness well and concentrated his wolf pack there. In the dark nights of March and April, dozens of convoys were destroyed mid-ocean, leaving no survivors to tell the tale. U-boat captains believed they were rewriting the rules of naval warfare. They did not need giant battleships, 406mm guns, or bombers, only silence, patience, and precise strikes. Each sunk merchant ship was a dagger in Britain's economic heart. In reports to Berlin, Dönitz asserted that keeping up a pace of 700,000 tons destroyed monthly would force Britain to surrender within 6 months. But victory came at a price. Despite propaganda painting them as invincible, every U-boat sortie was a gamble. Within the cramped compartments, 50 men lived shoulder to shoulder amid oil, sweat, and CO2. The air was so thick they had to take turns breathing through filtration masks. Weeks at sea left salt and metallic stench ingrained in their skin. They slept beside torpedoes, ate spoiled canned food, and were always ready to die without seeing the surface again. Many said, "Submarines have no veterans, only survivors." Yet in 1942, confidence in victory ran high. They believed in Dönitz, in his strategy, and in their superior technology. At Lorient, evenings were spent by the pier, watching U-boats silently slip away, red lights blinking atop the conning towers. Occupied French citizens watched with fear or awe, knowing these vessels carried war across the ocean. In his diary, Dönitz wrote, "We win not by numbers, but by fear. Each ship sunk awakens millions in Britain in panic. That is victory." And indeed, in 1942, that fear spread worldwide. Maps marked the waters from Newfoundland to West Africa in dense red, U-boat operational zones. On the U.S. East Coast, from New York to Miami, dozens of civilian ships were sunk within sight of ordinary people. Some nights, flames from burning ships could be seen reflecting on the ocean just miles from shore. The U.S. Navy called it the second happy time, the second harvest for German submarines. From Brest, Dönitz confidently reported to Hitler that the war beneath the waves has entered a decisive phase. He believed that with 200 more U-boats, Britain would kneel from hunger and fuel shortages. This conviction permeated the crews. They believed they were making history, and for a brief moment in 1942, they were almost right. The sea belonged to them. The wolf pack ruled the night, and no one, not even the Allies, could have imagined that just a year later, everything would change when another invisible weapon would appear in the skies, turning the ocean against those who once dominated it. By the end of 1942, German U-boats were still prowling the Atlantic, and Britain seemed to be losing a war in which the enemy could not be seen. Yet amid this despair, deep within Britain's laboratories and engineering workshops, a silent revolution was underway, not with guns but with science and technology. In just a few months, it would completely change the course of the naval war. On the surface, the battle still seemed to favor Germany. Hundreds of U-boats patrolled the North Atlantic from their bases in France. By day, they traveled submerged, surfacing at night to recharge batteries and communicate with headquarters. This was a vulnerability Dönitz had to accept, as battery technology at the time did not allow U-boats to remain submerged for more than 24 hours. For the Allies, however, this nightly surfacing was the only opening to hunt the wolves. From 1941, Britain began equipping patrol aircraft with ASV, air-to-surface vessel radar, capable of detecting metallic objects on the sea at night. The first version, ASV Mikhaitari, had a detection range of only 10-15 kilometers and was often disrupted by sea waves. Still, it was a major advance, allowing aircraft like the Wellington or Hudson to spot U-boats surfacing to recharge. But the Germans responded quickly, developing the METOX device, a simple radar detector that could listen for British radar frequencies. When METOX detected radar scanning, it emitted a beep-beep warning, giving the crew a few minutes to dive. Throughout the first half of 1942, the advantage remained with Germany. U-boats could still dive safely before aircraft approached. Each failed attack left the British Air Forces more desperate. Many officers began to believe that the naval war was hopeless, that they would never uncover the enemy hidden in darkness. Among those who refused to accept defeat was engineer Humphrey de Vere Lee, a reserve RAF officer. He understood radar's limitations. It could detect a target, but at about 1.5 kilometer, sea reflections caused the display to whiten out. right as the plane prepared to attack. This radar blind spot had saved hundreds of U-boats. Lee was determined to eliminate it. He proposed a seemingly simple idea: mount a powerful searchlight under the aircraft combined with radar. When radar lost contact, the light would switch on, illuminating the target in the first instant of the attack. This innovation became known as the Lee light. When the first prototype was tested, even the test pilot was amazed. In the pitch-black North Atlantic, the white beam tore through the darkness, revealing the U-boat struggling to submerge. The pilot simply dropped bombs or depth charges, and the target was destroyed within seconds. In July 1942, a Wellington aircraft equipped with ASV Make-2 radar and the Lee light destroyed a U-boat at night for the first time. From then on, darkness was no longer a refuge, as the Times proclaimed on its front page weeks later. As the tactic spread, U-boats began suffering heavy losses. They could no longer surface at night to recharge without fear of detection. Crews faced a choice: die of suffocation with dead batteries or die by bombs. Donitz realized the nightmare was approaching, but still believed Metox could keep them alive a little longer. Yet the most fearsome weapon of the Allies was still in the lab. In Britain, a team led by Robert Watson Watt and Edward Bowen was perfecting centimetric radar, a technological leap. Traditional meter-wave radar was easy to detect and provided blurry images. Centimetric radar with a 10-centimeter wavelength was far more precise and undetectable by Metox. The Germans had no idea their detectors could only hear the old frequencies. The new radar was completely silent to them. By March 1943, aircraft equipped with ASV Make-3 centimetric radar were deployed. U-boats began to be detected without warning. The familiar beep-beep of Metox was silent, and seconds later, the sky lit up with the Lee light. In the command room, captains shouted, "Alarm! Crash dive!" But it was too late. A bomb struck the stern, exploding and tearing the steel hull apart. The entire crew sank with the vessel within minutes. Initially, Donitz could not believe the reports. He suspected technical errors or misinformation. But surviving ships confirmed the change. "We were detected at night with no radar signal." Metox gave no warning. How could this happen? Recounted a U-boat captain captured after his rescue. Within months, the balance of power had completely shifted. U.S. Liberators and British Sunderlands and Wellingtons could now patrol the Atlantic day and night. U-boats once confident to surface now remained submerged, terrified of sudden attacks. French U-boat bases were continuously bombed by Allied aircraft. Simultaneously, Britain and the U.S. deployed escort carriers, smaller than standard carriers but capable of traveling with convoys and carrying a few dozen anti-submarine aircraft. Whenever radar or sonar detected suspicious signals, pilots took off immediately, dropping bombs and sonar buoys on the area. The Atlantic, once the Wolfpack's domain, had become a sea of radar and eyes in the sky. At Bletchley Park, where the Allies' brightest minds worked tirelessly, another breakthrough occurred. The Enigma code was cracked. Thanks to Alan Turing and the Ultra team, they began reading communications between U-boats and Donitz's headquarters. This allowed them to anticipate Wolfpack positions before attacks. In many cases, convoys were rerouted at night, avoiding ambushes without the Germans ever realizing it. An Allied officer wrote in his war diary, "With Ultra, we saw the enemy in the mirror. Whenever he moved, we were ready." For German sailors, this shift was nearly inexplicable. They still went to sea with the same confidence, but losses mounted. A U-boat leaving Lorient might never return, not due to combat, but because it was detected from the sky in a way they could not comprehend. The saying, "We are no longer the hunters, but the hunted," began circulating among U-boat crews. During the winter of 1942-43, losses became so severe that Donitz ordered fewer submarines to patrol. The situation did not improve. He finally faced the reality. The Allies had overtaken Germany technologically. From radar and computing to code-breaking, they had turned the ocean into a battlefield of intellect, where innovation and science determined the fate of thousands. By early 1943, German naval officers began calling areas near the French coast the Valley of Death. Any U-boat leaving port faced detection within hours. Survival rates per patrol plummeted. Each mission became a game of fate, where a single radar signal could mean the end. In a report to Hitler, Dönitz bitterly admitted, "The enemy has found the eyes of the sea. We are no longer invisible." From that moment, the golden age of the Wolfpack was over. They had once ruled the night, but the light of radar and lead lights turned night into day. Every surface submarine was observed by millions of electronic signals. From above, aircraft engines roared like the tolling of a death bell. In the first months of 1943 alone, over 120 U-boats were destroyed, nearly a quarter of the entire fleet. It was the price for believing that old tactics could win the war. For the Allies, it proved the power of science, intelligence, and persistence in desperation. The Atlantic had changed color. From the gray of the sea wolves, it became the cold blue of radar and the beams of lead lights piercing the water. From then on, the fate of the German U-boat war entered a completely different chapter, a chapter of irreversible decline. By 1943, the Atlantic was no longer the same sea. The waves still rolled, the wind still howled from Iceland down to the Bay of Biscay. But beneath the surface, the world of the U-boat sea wolves was beginning to rot from the core. Ships that once made the entire Royal Navy wary had become hunted targets, and it all began with a silent revolution in Allied radar laboratories. In March 1943, the British officially deployed the ASV Mickey 3 radar, operating at a 10 centimeter wavelength, based on the magnetron technology they had painstakingly developed. What seemed like a simple technical improvement transformed the entire undersea battlefield. Previously, the German METOX receivers could detect the Allies' long-wave radar signals, giving U-boat captains early warning to dive. But Centimetric radar rendered METOX completely silent. U-boats were now tracked without ever knowing it. The nightmare began. From early 1943, Allied patrol squadrons from Britain, Canada, and the US operated day and night, coordinating with escort destroyers protecting convoys across the Atlantic. With the new radar, they could detect German submarines from over 30 kilometers away, even if the U-boat had only its periscope or radar mast above the surface. In the pitch-black night, faint blips on radar screens guided pilots to their targets. When the lee light swept across the water, German crews had less than 30 seconds to react. The glory days of the Wolfpack vanished quickly. From March to May 1943, the Allies intensified attacks on U-boat patrol routes, particularly in the mid-Atlantic, the so-called air gap, previously unreachable by patrol aircraft. But now, with escort carriers such as HMS Biter, Archer, and Tracker, along with long-range B-24 Liberators, the gap no longer existed. No place was safe. In April, distress signals flooded U-boat command communications. Submarines like U-332, U-191, and U-456 were destroyed within days. Collective Wolfpack attacks, once the symbol of Admiral Karl Dönitz's strategy, became mass suicides. Whenever a U-boat approached a convoy, Allied radar detected it immediately. Depth charges and rockets rained down. The North Atlantic in spring that year ran red with blood and diesel. In the diary of U-333's commanding officer, Lieutenant Peter Erich Kremer, he wrote, "We are no longer the hunters. Now the sea itself hunts us." On May 23, 1943, U-752 was attacked by British aircraft off the coast of Spain. Shells and bombs tore the vessel in two within seconds. Such events occurred almost daily. In less than 3 months, over 120 U-boats were sunk, many never sending their final coordinates. When reports reached headquarters in Lorient and Kiel, Dönitz was stunned. Throughout his career, he had believed that the Wolfpack tactic and the iron discipline of German crews could overcome any enemy technology. But the cold reports from the front revealed an undeniable truth. For every wolf sent to sea, survival odds were under 30%. Germany's submarine logistics system was crumbling. By mid-May 1943, Dönitz, now commander-in-chief of the German Navy, was forced to issue one of the bitterest orders of his career: withdraw all U-boats from the North Atlantic. The struggle for control of the shipping lanes had failed. Within weeks, the bases at Brest, Saint-Nazaire, and Lorient were shrouded in gloom. Surviving crews returned smelling of engine oil and salt, eyes hollow from emptiness. The Germans called this period Der Schwarze Mai, Black May. In May alone, 41 submarines were lost while sinking only 34 Allied merchant ships. For the first time since the war began, losses exceeded achievements. The Battle of the Atlantic, once promoted as a symbol of Nazi naval power, had become a mass grave for an entire generation of young sailors. The seas that had once been U-boat pride were renamed by the Allies the Valley of Death. Along the Bay of Biscay, where submarines had to surface to return to port, British and American aircraft maintained constant patrols, attacking relentlessly. Many U-boats were sunk just tens of nautical miles from shore before reaching safety. By the end of the summer, Germany had lost nearly a third of its operational submarine fleet. Meanwhile, in Britain, Prime Minister Winston Churchill breathed a sigh of relief. He had once admitted, "The threat that kept me awake at night during the war was not bombs or tanks, but U-boats." In June 1943, he declared before Parliament, "We have turned the tide. The Atlantic belongs to freedom once again." This reversal was not just a victory of technology, it was proof of total war, when radar, code-breaking weapons, and combined air-sea tactics functioned as a single system. From engineers' laboratories to pilots' cockpits and sailors' decks, it formed a comprehensive anti-submarine network in which no U-boat could hide. Survivors of Black May later recounted that they no longer felt victory or loyalty. Only fear remained. Every sortie meant odds of return smaller than surviving artillery on land. On the surface, they lived under the illusion that enemy radar could see through the night, and that every invisible wave was a death sentence. By the end of 1943, although Germany continued to deploy new submarines, the spirit of the wolf pack had been broken. Sailors who once walked the docks proudly now stooped, stepping into their cramped boats as though entering iron coffins. They understood that, after that fateful spring, undersea warfare had entered a new chapter, a chapter of despair. From a historical perspective, Black May was not merely a tactical failure for Nazi Germany, it was a strategic turning point in World War II. With the Atlantic supply lines between the US and Britain secured, America could transport millions of tons of supplies, weapons, fuel, and troops to Europe, preparing for Normandy and other fronts. The collapse of the U-boat threat not only saved tens of thousands of Allied sailors, but paved the way for ultimate victory. For the Germans, the deaths of thousands of U-boat sailors were not just a loss, they marked the end of an era, one in which courage alone was thought sufficient to overcome technology. But 1943 proved otherwise. In modern warfare, technology was not just a tool, it was destiny. After the Black May of 1943, the ocean, once Germany's faithful ally, had turned against them. U-boats leaving the ports of Brest or Lorient no longer carried the proud stature of the wolf packs that once dominated the Atlantic. They moved like spirits through the fog, aware that only fate awaited them ahead. Yet despite the disaster, Admiral Karl Dönitz refused to surrender. He believed that with iron will and a series of new technologies, Germany could regain the initiative. The war with Dönitz was not merely about submarines, it was a battle of time and ingenuity. With the Allies controlling the skies and the airwaves, he understood that even a single technical innovation could shift the balance. In the damp factories of Kiel, Hamburg, and Bremen, German naval engineers embarked on a desperate race against the world. The first initiative was Naxos, a new radar receiver designed to replace the now useless Metox. Naxos could detect higher frequency radar signals, alerting crews when aircraft were scanning them. But its range was only a few kilometers, and when the warning sounded, it was already too late. Some captains described the Naxos alarm as the death knell ringing only seconds before the flash of bombs illuminated the water. Not stopping there, the Germans deployed the Schnorkel, a snorkel allowing U-boats to run diesel engines while submerged, avoiding detection by radar or aircraft. In theory, it was a great advance. Submarines could travel hundreds of nautical miles without surfacing. In practice, reality was cruel. The Schnorkel rattled violently in heavy seas and could break. Engine noise carried tens of kilometers, making detection by Allied sonar easy. Even worse, the air inside the vessel became stifling, filled with CO2. Crew members labored in darkness, sweat pouring, lungs burning, and many fainted from oxygen deprivation. Survivors recalled that when the Schnorkel was raised, the air in the submarine felt as heavy as lead, the scent of oil, metal, and men mingled in the confined space. Every wave forced intake valves to shut, shifting pressures that ripped at eardrums. Yet they endured, because it was the only way to survive under an enemy sky bristling with radar. By mid-1943, Dönitz ordered the deployment of U-boat flak, anti-aircraft submarines. The daring idea: instead of fleeing, fight. Vessels such as U-441, U-256, and U-621 were equipped with 20mm and 37mm anti-aircraft guns, enough to fend off attacking planes. Initially, a few skirmishes brought unexpected results. Some British aircraft were shot down, and crew morale lifted, but that fleeting victory did not last. The Atlantic sky was dominated by hundreds of patrol squadrons, each aircraft able to call in 2 or 3 reinforcements. When flak U-boats paused to fight, they became stationary targets. These anti-aircraft submarines were quickly destroyed, their wrecks sinking to the bottom of the Bay of Biscay, ending the illusion of dueling the skies. Meanwhile, the Allies pressed their advantage. ASV-MKV radar and HF-DF Huff-Duff systems allowed them to locate submarines with mere seconds of signal transmission. Every U-boat message to headquarters plotted its own death on a map. Escort convoys, now equipped with sonar, improved depth charges like Hedgehog, anti-submarine rockets, and automated guns could strike relentlessly without waiting for the submarine to surface. By mid-1944, the situation was so dire that U-boat crews referred to the Bay of Biscay as the Steel Graveyard. Every sortie meant walking a path from which there was no return. Once impenetrable bases at Lorient, Saint-Nazaire, and La Rochelle were bombed relentlessly by B-17s and Lancasters. Ships were routinely blown apart before leaving the docks. Amid the ruins, Dönitz placed his final hope in a new generation of submarines, the Type 21 and Type 43. These were the first true submersibles, designed for extended underwater operation rather than temporary submersion. The Type 21 could reach 17 knots submerged, had large capacity batteries, a streamlined hull, and automatic charging systems, a masterpiece of German engineering. Yet, as with all innovations in a desperate era, it was too late. Production lines were bombed, materials scarce, and workers drafted into the war. When the first Type 21 was ready in April 1945, the war was nearly over. Meanwhile, U-boat crew morale had collapsed. Survival rates plummeted. Only 1 in 4 returned from each patrol. Sailors carried hastily written letters to their families hidden in life jackets, knowing they might be their last. Gone were the festive send-offs, the marching tunes. The docks were filled with silent handshakes and eyes watching steel shadows vanish into the fog. In 1944, as the Allies prepared for the Normandy landings, U-boats were ordered to intercept the massive Allied convoys, but radar, sonar, and air superiority rendered all efforts futile. In the weeks after D-Day, more than 60 German submarines were sunk off the coasts of France and England, causing almost no significant damage in return. The harsh truth was clear. Nazi Germany had lost the technology war. Every innovation, every wonder weapon, from Schnorkel to Type 21, could not counter the Allies' network of radar, aircraft, and intelligence, which far exceeded German technical limits. Moreover, the German naval pride, the Enigma code, had long been broken. Every message Dönitz sent was in Allied hands. What he thought was secret was read line by the enemy. By the end of 1944, the U-boat campaign was no longer a strategy. It had become a symbol of stubbornness. Dönitz still ordered sorties, still spoke of naval glory and honor, but even he knew that such glory was only a memory. Newly commissioned submarines, hastily trained, ventured out and never returned. In the memoirs of U-977 officer Heinz Schäfer, who later escaped to Argentina, he wrote, "We no longer fought for victory, but because we could not bear the shame of staying ashore. We went out of loyalty, and because there was nowhere else to go." These words encapsulate the spirit of the final years, a war in which courage and skill were crushed by technology, by radar-filled skies and sonar-laden seas. By the end of 1944, the Northern Atlantic seas had become a massive graveyard of over 700 submarines. Each lay as a cold steel husk under mud, shrouded in darkness and silence, home to 28,000 souls who never returned. From the surface, there was no engine noise, no radio signal, only untold stories buried beneath the waves. These desperate efforts could not save the German Navy, but they left a bitter legacy. Human ingenuity can reach its peak even in despair. Dönitz and his team created technological marvels ahead of their time, but in a war where the enemy held industrial and intelligence supremacy, those inventions were mere candles in a storm. By spring 1945, as bombs rained over Berlin and the Soviet flag flew over the Reichstag, the last U-boats still ventured out, not by order but as a ritual. Some surrendered in Norway or Britain, others scuttled themselves to avoid capture. The ocean closed the circle of the wolf packs, from pride to despair, from glory to oblivion. And on the shattered shores of Germany, Karl Dönitz, the man who dreamed of an empire beneath the waves, silently signed the order to surrender all remaining U-boats. For him, the war ended not with explosions, but with the ocean's quiet. In the spring of 1945, the cold north wind swept across Germany's shattered harbors. The massive U-boat bases at Lorient, La Rochelle, and Kiel, once echoing with the roar of engines, were now mere piles of cracked concrete under the Allied bombing. On the surface of the sea, the U-boat campaign, the pride of Karl Dönitz and the Third Reich, had become a ghost of itself. Each steel wolf, each young sailor who had once dreamed of glory, was now reduced to rusting wrecks resting silently on the ocean floor, in darkness and silence. In May 1945, when Hitler committed suicide in his Berlin bunker, Dönitz was appointed president of Germany, a ceremonial role in the final days. He knew the empire he served had collapsed, and the German Navy was little more than remnants. Yet Dönitz issued his final command: all active U-boats must cease fighting, surface, and surrender. This order, broadcast on May 4th, rang as the death knell for one of the most tragic chapters in maritime history. As the radio signal "U-boat surrender, surface immediately" echoed across the waves, hundreds of submarines drifting in the North Sea, Norwegian waters, and the Atlantic surfaced simultaneously. A few refusing to surrender scuttled themselves along with their crews. Others raised white flags, quietly heading for ports in Britain, Canada, or Norway under the watchful eyes of the enemy. Some survived. Others vanished into the waves without a trace. History cannot fully capture those final moments, only that the undersea war ended in absolute silence. In total, during World War II, Germany built 1,162 submarines, of which 785 were destroyed. Over 28,000 of the 40,000 U-boat sailors perished, about 70%, the highest fatality rate of any military branch in the war. Many did not die in battle, but from exhaustion, suffocation, or being trapped in a vessel split in two. For them, the ocean was a grave, and steel the coffin. Survivors returned as shadows of themselves. They carried in their minds the echo of depth-charge explosions, the sonar pings of the enemy like a heartbeat, and the invisible fear of waiting for death. Some became prisoners of war. Others went insane. A few retreated into quiet, avoiding the sea entirely. In his memoir, Iron Coffins, former Captain Herbert Werner wrote, "We lived in iron coffins and died in the dark. The ocean was no longer a companion. It was a loyal gravekeeper." When the war ended, the Allies launched Operation Deadlight to destroy the remaining German submarines. Over 100 U-boats were towed into the Atlantic off the coast of Ireland and sunk, never to be reused. A few were preserved for study or museum display, most famously U-995, now exhibited in Le Beau near Kiel, serving as a memorial to the tens of thousands of U-boat souls resting beneath the waves. Visitors entering the submarine can see everything intact: the control panels, air compressors, narrow bunks, and rusting pipes along the ceiling. The scent of engine oil lingers, as if the crew had just departed yesterday. Yet this silence speaks louder than any words. A great industry, an era of deep-sea conquest, ended in tragedy. From a strategic perspective, the failure of the U-boat campaign was the turning point of the entire Battle of the Atlantic. Once the sea lanes connecting the US and Britain were secured, the Allies could transport unlimited supplies, weapons, and troops to Europe, the prerequisite for opening the Normandy front in 1944. Without victory at sea, there would have been no D-Day, no liberation of France, and likely no rapid collapse of the Third Reich. But the U-boat story is not only a lesson in tactics or technology. It is the tragedy of men trapped between loyalty and truth. Young sailors, many only 19 or 20, believed they were defending their homeland, yet in reality, they were victims of a massive war machine. They fought not for ideology, but for honor, for comrades, and because they knew no other way to survive. One overlooked detail: in the final days, even when defeat was certain, many U-boat captains tried to save their crews. Some secretly surrendered to the Allies to avoid casualties. Others placed Allied prisoners on lifeboats before scuttling their vessels. They fought to the end while retaining a measure of humanity in the darkness of war. The collapse of the U-boats also revealed the true power of modern warfare, not a contest of courage against courage, but of technology and information. When centimeter wave radar, sonar, and the Enigma code were deciphered, Germany had no chance. They were seen, heard, and predicted at every turn. The battle was no longer fought between men, but between numbers, frequencies, and invisible electronic signals. This bitter truth was acknowledged by Karl Donitz at the Nuremberg trials. We lost not because of a lack of courage, but because the enemy had tools we could never comprehend. From a human perspective, the U-boat story is a haunting reminder. No matter how advanced, technology cannot save a flawed ideal. Nazi Germany invested billions of Reichsmarks in submarines, jet aircraft, and V-2 rockets. Yet all was meaningless against the collective will of democratic nations and the industrial power of the United States. Today, deep beneath the Atlantic, hundreds of U-boat wrecks lie silently, overgrown with marine life, like invisible markers of the past. Oceanographers call them the steel forests of the deep. Many sites are war sanctuaries, untouchable. These are cemeteries without headstones, where only currents and sand bear witness to the souls dissolved in salt water. Each year at the Labo Memorial, the names of lost submarines are read aloud. Thousands of names, thousands of numbers, each a story, each a life. Amid the whisper of the sea wind, the granite inscription remains. Sie starben für ihr Vaterland. They died for their fatherland. Yet over time, the meaning of those words has shifted. They no longer symbolize war, but the folly humanity paid so dearly to learn. Looking back, perhaps the greatest lesson of the submarine war lies not in strategy or weapons, but in human fragility before technological progress. In 1942, a submarine could hide beneath the waves and dominate the sea. A year later, the same vessel became prey, hunted. All because of a new radar chip, a decrypted signal, a minor technical upgrade. In the modern world, the gap between power and annihilation can be just seconds, or a single technological leap. World War II has long ended, but the echoes of the wolf pack still linger in human memory. They remind us that no weapon is absolute, no power eternal. When humans blindly place their faith in machines and authority, they forget that they are both the wielder and the victim. Deep beneath the waves, in eternal darkness, the U-boat wrecks remain, not only as relics of war, but as a warning to future generations. When the gap between detection and destruction is only a few seconds, it is not just a ship that sinks, it is an empire that falls.